Okay, so are you ready to dive deep into this world of spies and secrets?
Always ready.
Awesome. We're talking about the history of intelligence agencies and all the stuff they do that sounds like it's out of a movie, but is actually real.
It's a world where the lines between necessary and morally justifiable can get really blurry.
Yeah, totally. And I think a lot of people don't even know where these agencies came from.
Right, it's not common knowledge.
Exactly. So,
Huh.
we all know about the CIA, but where did they even come from?
Well, it all goes back to World War II with the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services.
Okay, the OSS.
Yeah, and a lot of the early members were these elite figures from Wall Street.
Oh, interesting.
And get this, some of them even had ties to companies that did business with Nazi Germany.
Whoa. Hold on, seriously.
Yeah, it's true. Like Alan Dulles, who later became the director of the CIA.
Okay.
He had some early connections to Nazis and, fascist sympathizers.
So even from the start, there were some shady connections.
Yeah, you could say that.
But how did the OSS actually become the CIA?
Well, after the war, the OSS was disbanded officially, but a lot of the people and the work they did got absorbed into the newly created Central Intelligence Agency
And when was this?
in 1947 with the National Security Act.
Ah, okay.
And this act gave the CIA a ton of power, including this really vague phrase about other functions and duties.
Other functions and duties. What does that even mean?
Yeah, it's super open-ended, and that lack of oversight is where things start to get messy.
It sounds like giving someone a loaded gun and just saying, be careful.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they didn't always be careful, especially during the Cold War.
Yeah, that was a crazy day.
Their focus shifted to the Third World, and they were super involved in stopping the spread of communism.
Right.
Like a prime example is the Greek Civil War in 1946.
Okay.
The CIA was terrified of a communist takeover, so they pumped millions of dollars into supporting the right-wing forces.
Even though those forces weren't exactly the good guys.
Well, they were known for being pretty authoritarian.
So they were propping up dictators just to stop communism.
That was kind of the thinking back then.
It sounds a lot like they were just choosing sides based on their own interests, not really on what was right.
It's definitely a complicated situation.
And didn't they do something similar in Iran in 1953?
Oh, absolutely. The Iranian coup is a classic example of the CIA meddling in other countries' affairs.
Right.
They orchestrated the whole thing to get rid of Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh.
By him.
Well, he had nationalized the Iranian oil industry,
Ah, I see.
and that was a threat to Western oil interests.
So it wasn't just about fighting communism, it was about money and power too.
Often, those things were all mixed up.
I guess that makes sense, but installing a dictator like the Shah doesn't exactly seem like a recipe for stability.
Yeah, and that's the tragic irony of it.
It is.
They created a whole new set of problems down the line, like the Iranian Revolution in 1979.
Right, because the Shah was really unpopular.
Exactly.
And, I mean, look at what happened.
Yeah.
It seems like this pattern just kept repeating itself throughout the Cold War, didn't it?
Over and over again.
From Guatemala in 1954 to Chile in 1973.
They toppled governments, backed coups, rigged elections.
All in the name of fighting communism, but also protecting their own interests.
Yeah, and it raises the question of how much the U.S. government actually knew about what the CIA was doing.
Right, did the presidents know what was going on?
That's something historians are still debating.
It must be hard to untangle all those secrets.
It is, but what is clear is that the CIA had a lot of freedom, especially early on in the Cold War.
So they were basically a law unto themselves.
Pretty much.
And all this was happening without the American people even knowing about it, right?
For the most part, yeah.
Wow, that's just wild.
The operations were top secret, and the media didn't really report on them.
So there was no accountability.
Not really.
It's a bit scary to think about.
It is, and what's even more disturbing is that this didn't end with the Cold War.
You're saying they're still involved in shady stuff around the world.
There's definitely evidence to suggest that.
Well, that's something we'll have to dig into more later.
Def-
But before we move on, I'm really curious about those early OSS members who had ties to companies doing business with Nazi Germany.
Right.
It just seems like a huge conflict of interest.
It was a very different time.
I guess so, but it makes you wonder about their true motives.
It definitely raises some important questions.
Were they really looking out for the best interests of America, or were they serving other agendas?
That's a question we're thinking about as we continue this deep dive.
Agreed. It's crucial to remember that these agencies can have a huge impact on the world.
Both good and bad.
Yeah, and we need to be aware of that.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's move on to the next chapter in the story of intelligence agencies.
Let's do it. So we've been talking about the CIA's actions during the Cold War.
Right, all the interventions and shady stuff.
But their reach went way beyond toppling governments and propping up dictators.
Okay.
They got into some seriously messed up experiments.
Like what?
All in the name of national security, of course.
Yeah, right, national security.
I mean, have you heard of MKUltra?
Yeah, the CIA's mind control program.
That's the one.
I mean, that's some seriously dark stuff.
Oh, it's chilling. Truly chilling.
So they were basically trying to brainwash people.
Yeah, pretty much.
And not just like, propaganda.
No. This was like full-on mind control.
Trying to create like Manchurian candidates.
Exactly.
So what did they do?
I mean, they tried all sorts of crazy stuff.
Like what?
LSD and other drugs, hypnosis, electroshock therapy.
Seriously?
Even sensory deprivation, like locking people up in total darkness and silence.
It sounds awful.
It was, and they weren't exactly picky about who they experimented on.
You're saying they weren't just using volunteers?
Oh no, they used prisoners, mental patients, even regular people who had no idea what was going on.
That's messed up.
It's a total violation of human rights.
So did it work? Did they create any mind-controlled assassins?
It's hard to say for sure. The results were mostly a mess, and a lot of people were seriously harmed.
Really?
Oh yeah, some people even died because of these experiments.
And then they tried to cover it all up.
Pretty much. Most of the records were destroyed in the 70s.
It's crazy to think this was happening in America.
I know, right?
The land of the free, home of the brave, and also apparently home to secret mind control experiments.
Yeah, it's not exactly something we like to talk about.
So why did they do it? I mean, what was the thinking behind all this?
Well, the Cold War was a scary time, a lot of paranoia and fear,
Right.
and the CIA was obsessed with fighting communism.
To the point where they thought anything was justified,
Pretty much.
even torturing innocent people.
It's a dark chapter in our history, and it raises a lot of ethical questions.
It also makes you wonder what else they were up to that we still don't know about.
Oh, I'm sure there's plenty we haven't uncovered yet.
Well, let's hope we never find out.
Agreed.
But speaking of going too far, what about Operation Mockingbird?
Ah, yes, that's another one for the books.
That's where the CIA was using journalists to spread propaganda, right?
Yeah, they infiltrated news organizations, planted stories, basically controlled the narrative.
So the news wasn't really the news?
Not always, no.
That's messed up. I mean, how could they do that?
They saw it as a way to influence public opinion, to fight communism on the ideological battlefield.
But it's a total betrayal of trust.
Absolutely.
It makes you question everything you read and hear.
Yeah, it erodes trust in institutions, and that's dangerous.
Okay, but if they were so focused on fighting communism, why get involved in the drug trade?
What do you mean?
Like the French connection.
Ah,
It was a whole scheme to use heroin profits to fund their operations, right?
Well, it's a bit more complicated than that.
How so?
The CIA needed money to fund their secret wars in Southeast Asia.
So they turned to the drug trade.
It was a way to get untraceable funds.
But that's totally hypocritical.
Yeah.
I mean, they were fighting communism while also fueling a drug epidemic.
I mean, it was a different time, and the logic was that the ends justified the means.
But didn't it backfire? I mean, didn't that contribute to the heroin problem in the U.S.?
There's definitely evidence to suggest that it did.
It's tragic how their actions, even if they thought they were doing the right thing, ended up hurting so many people.
It's a reminder that even with good intentions, things can go horribly wrong.
Especially when you're operating in the shadows with no accountability.
Exactly.
Okay, but what about those secret armies in Europe?
You mean Operation Gladio?
Yeah, that's the one.
That was a whole other level of crazy.
So these were like secret armies that were supposed to fight the Soviets if they invaded.
Yeah, like sleeper cells, ready to be activated.
But they weren't just used for that, were they?
No, unfortunately not.
What else were they used for?
Well, in some cases, they were used to attack their own citizens.
You're kidding.
Nope, it was a way for governments to silence dissent and maintain control.
And the CIA was involved in all this?
In some cases, yes.
This is insane. I feel like I'm learning more about history in this deep dive than I ever did in school.
Well, that's the beauty of it, isn't it?
I guess so, but it's also pretty terrifying.
It is. It's a reminder of how easily power can be abused, especially when it's hidden from public view.
And how important it is to hold those in power accountable.
Absolutely. We can't just blindly trust authority. We need to be vigilant and question everything.
Okay, well, on that note, let's move on to some specific examples of the CIA's more bizarre operations.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, so we've been talking about all this crazy stuff like mind control and secret armies,
Yeah, some pretty wild stuff.
but you mentioned some specific examples that sound like they're straight out of a spy novel.
Oh yeah, like that story about the OSS agents treating Ho Chi Minh for malaria.
Yeah, in Vietnam, right? What was up with that? It seems crazy that they'd help a communist leader.
Well, it was 1945, right at the end of World War II.
Okay.
And at that point, Ho Chi Minh was seen as an ally against the Japanese.
So the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Exactly. The OSS was willing to work with anyone who was fighting the Japanese. They didn't really know about his communist ties.
And I guess they didn't foresee the whole Vietnam War happening later on.
Nope, definitely not.
So it was a bit of a miscalculation.
You could say that.
It just shows how quickly things can change in the world of intelligence.
For sure. Alliances can shift overnight.
Okay, what about that story of bugging Aristotle Onassis's yacht? That sounds like something straight out of James Bond.
Oh yeah, that one's wild. It shows how the CIA got involved in the whole world of oil politics.
Okay, I'm all ears.
So Onassis, this Greek shipping tycoon,
Right.
he was involved in negotiating the Jeddah agreements.
The what?
Jeddah agreements, they were a series of deals between Saudi Arabia and some big oil companies, mostly American.
Wrong.
And these agreements would have given Saudi Arabia way more control over their oil production.
So the CIA was worried about losing their grip on the oil.
Basically,
Oil was, and still is, a pretty big deal.
huge. And the CIA was determined to protect American interests, even if it meant resorting to some shady tactics.
So they bugged his yacht to try and sabotage the deal.
That's the story.
How did they even manage to do that?
They got this guy, Robert Maheu, ex-FBI agent, fixer for Howard Hughes.
Right.
He had a reputation for getting things done no matter what.
So he put together a team to infiltrate Onassis's yacht and plant bugs.
Allegedly, yes.
That's incredible. Did they get anything useful, though?
It's not really clear, and we don't know if it affected the Jeddah agreements in the end.
But it just goes to show how far they were willing to go.
Exactly. No one was off limits.
Okay, let's talk about something a little different. What about that story of J. Edgar Hoover in drag at the Plaza Hotel?
Ah, the Blue Suite. That's a classic.
Is there any truth to it, though?
It's a story that's been around forever, and it's hard to say for sure.
Right. Hoover was a very private person.
Incredibly so. And he was obsessed with his image, wanted to appear squeaky clean.
So what's the connection to the Blue Suite?
Well, it was this legendary spot at the Plaza Hotel, a place where the rich and famous hung out, made deals, all that stuff.
So Hoover was partying with the elite.
According to Susan Kaufman, yes.
She's the one who claimed to have seen him in drag.
Yeah, she said she saw him at a party hosted by this wealthy guy, Louis Rosenstiel.
J. Edgar Hoover in drag. That's hard to imagine.
I know, right? And it would have been a huge scandal if it got out.
So did she make it up?
It's hard to say. The FBI denied it all, tried to discredit her.
It's one of those mysteries that we'll probably never know the answer to.
For sure, but it adds another layer of intrigue to the whole story.
Speaking of intrigue, what about General Ferreira? This guy sounds like a total enigma.
Oh, he was a legend, a master of covert operations, always working in the shadows.
And he was involved in that whole five-star trust thing, right?
Yeah, the alleged slush fund that the CIA used to manage all the money they got from their shady dealings.
Okay, and Ferreira was a key player in all this.
Oh yeah, he knew the intelligence world inside and out, and he had connections to organized crime.
But then he turned against the CIA, right?
Well, he saw how corrupt they were, how much power they had, and he decided to fight back.
And he protected Marion Horn, the guy who claimed to have been cheated out of billions.
Exactly. Ferreira knew where the bodies were buried, so to speak.
So what happened to him in the end?
No one knows for sure. He just vanished in the early 90s.
Some people say he went into hiding. Others say he died under mysterious circumstances.
It's a mystery that may never be solved.
It's like he just disappeared into the shadows, just like the secrets he was trying to expose.
Yeah, it's a reminder that the world of intelligence is a dangerous game.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, from the origins of the CIA to mind control, secret armies, and mysterious disappearances.
It's a lot to take in.
It really makes you think about the world in a whole new way.
That's what we're here for, to challenge your assumptions and make you question everything.
And to remind everyone that power can be a dangerous thing, especially when it's hidden from view.
Absolutely. We need to be vigilant and hold those in power accountable.
Well said. And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder all the mysteries we've uncovered today.
Keep your eyes open and never stop questioning.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the shadowy world of intelligence agencies.
It's been a pleasure.